I'm Ava Sterling, 26, and my grandfather's funeral was supposed to be about love and memory. Instead, it turned into a quiet auction with black dresses and sharpened smiles. After the service, we filed into Mr. Morrison's mahogany-paneled office, the kind of room where money feels heavier than air. My mother, Linda, sat primly in a Chanel suit, dabbing eyes that hadn't cried. My father, David, checked his Rolex as if time itself were a dividend. Marcus, my brother, sprawled like he already owned the chair, and my cousin Jennifer whispered numbers into her husband's ear, a metronome of greed. Mr. Morrison cleared his throat. To my son, David Thompson, I leave the family shipping business and all associated assets. Dad's face lit like a holiday window. To my daughter-in-law, Linda Thompson, I bequeath the Napa Valley estate, including furnishings and artwork. Mother's mouth softened into her first real smile of the day. To my grandson, Marcus Thompson, my vintage automobiles and the Manhattan penthouse. A fist pump under the table. To my granddaughter, Jennifer Davis, the yacht Isabella and the Martha's Vineyard home. A triumphant squeeze of her husband's hand. Then silence. The kind that makes you hear your own pulse. To my granddaughter, Ava Sterling, Mr. Morrison continued, looking straight at me, I leave this envelope. An envelope. A strangled laugh skittered around the table. Mother patted my knee, a gesture soft enough to bruise. Well, honey, there's meaning in small things, she murmured, sunlighting her condescension. Marcus leaned in, smirk tilting. Maybe it's monopoly money, sis. Very on brand. I kept my fingers steady on the paper even as heat crawled up my throat. 15 summers I'd spent beside Grandpa, chessboards between us, tide maps spread across picnic tables, stories about Monaco and Las Vegas whispered like secrets. Surely he'd left me more than stationary. I stood. The leather chair exhaled behind me. Excuse me, I said, because dignity is a door you hold for yourself when no one else will. Laughter followed me down the hall, thin and tinny, like bad music through a wall. In the elevator's mirrored hush, I slit the envelope. A first-class ticket to Monaco, dated next week. A single line in Grandpa's firm script. Trust activated on your 26th birthday, sweetheart. Time to claim what's always been yours. My breath snagged. There was something else. A business card embossed in gold. Prince Alexander de Monaco, private secretary. On the back, Grandpa's handwriting again. He's managing your trust. And then the paper that made my hands tremble so hard I had to brace against the steel. A Credit Suisse statement for the Ava R. Sterling Trust balance. $347,000. I counted the zeros twice. Then again. The numbers didn't blink. The floor rose gently beneath my shoes as the elevator descended, as if the building itself bowed. I thought of Mother's pat, Marcus's smirk, the way everyone's faces had glowed beneath the fluorescent halo of inheritance. I tasted humiliation going stale on my tongue, and something sharper beneath it. Not revenge, not yet, just knowledge. Cold, clean, undeniable. The doors opened to the lobby's polished stone. I stepped out taller than I'd gone in, the envelope tucked like a blade inside my bag. Upstairs, they were dividing a legacy. Down here, I was holding an empire written in my name. Grandpa hadn't overlooked me. He'd hidden me in plain sight. That night, I sat in my tiny apartment, the envelope spread open on my kitchen table like it was alive. The numbers on the Credit Suisse statement glowed under the light. $347,000. I kept tracing the zeros with my fingertip, waiting for them to vanish, waiting for the punchline that never came. Grandpa, what did you do? I barely slept. At sunrise, I called the international number printed on the statement. A calm, accented voice answered, Credit Suisse, Private Wealth Management Division. How may I assist you? My name is Ava Sterling, I said carefully. I received a statement for a trust in my name. I think there's been a mistake. After several transfers and identity verifications that felt like small interrogations, a man with a polished British tone came on the line. Miss Sterling, there's no mistake. Your grandfather, Robert Thompson, established the Ava R. Sterling Trust when you were 16. It was structured to activate on your 26th birthday. But I never signed anything. I whispered. As a minor, your consent was not required, he explained. Your grandfather was the settler. The trust's assets have been managed and reinvested internationally for a decade. I stared at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. A woman in a wrinkled t-shirt, hair tied back, holding a mug of lukewarm coffee, and tried to imagine that reflection belonging to someone worth hundreds of millions. What kind of assets? I asked finally. I'm not authorized to share those details over the phone, he said. But your appointed representative, Prince Alexander de Monaco, will brief you upon your arrival next week. When the call ended, I sat motionless for a long time, the silence ringing. My family's group chat buzzed with photos of luxury. Marcus posing beside car magazines, Jennifer bragging about yacht interiors, Mother discussing paint colors for the Napa estate. Not one message asking what Grandpa had left me. They thought the envelope was a joke, and maybe it was. But the joke was on them. By morning, my shock had cooled into something steadier. Curiosity. Grandpa had spent years testing me with questions about ethics, markets, people. I used to think he was just reminiscing. Now I realized he'd been preparing me, training me. When I met my parents for breakfast the next day, I decided to test them too. I'm thinking of taking that trip to Monaco, I said lightly. Dad nearly choked on his coffee. Monaco? That's not for tourists, Ava. That's for people with real money. Mother smirked over her mimosa. You'll stick out like a sore thumb, dear. Maybe you can bring home some postcards. I smiled, stirring my coffee until the spoon clicked against porcelain. Maybe I will, I said quietly. They laughed, and I let them, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the poor one at the table. I was just the only one who knew the truth. Grandpa's game had begun, and I was finally learning how to play. The first-class cabin smelled of leather, champagne, and quiet power. For 11 hours I sat wrapped in that surreal comfort, trying to understand what my life had just become. Every clink of glassware reminded me that this seat, this world, had always belonged to someone like my grandfather. And now somehow to me. When we landed, the Mediterranean sunlight hit me like a mirror, dazzling and impossible to look away from. Monaco was nothing like the photos. It was a kingdom built on glitter and precision, white yachts floating like crowns on turquoise water, streets lined with flowers and Ferraris, voices in French, Italian, English, all threaded with money. A man in a black suit waited at arrivals, holding a sign that read, Miss Ava Sterling, beneficiary of the Sterling Trust. My pulse tripped. He bowed slightly. Welcome to Monaco, Miss Sterling. Prince Alexander is expecting you. I followed him to a sleek black Mercedes that purred along the coast. The sea on my right glittered like liquid silver. On the left, marble villas climbed the cliffs. My grandfather used to tell me that power wasn't loud. It was the hum beneath everything. The thing you only noticed when you finally listened. Now I could hear it everywhere. The car stopped before a grand white building overlooking the harbor. Inside, silence carried its own authority. The driver led me down a hall lined with gold-framed portraits and opened a carved wooden door. Miss Sterling, he announced. Your appointment. Behind a massive desk, a man rose. He was exactly as the embossed card had described. Tall, confident, impossibly composed. Miss Sterling, he said with a faint smile. I am Alexander. Thank you for coming. Your Highness? I stammered, but he waved it off gently. Please, call me Alexander. Your grandfather insisted that titles make honesty more difficult. Something in me unclenched. You knew him? Very well, he said, gesturing for me to sit. He was not just a client, he was a strategist. Perhaps the best I've ever met, and he often spoke of you, of me. I echoed. Alexander opened a folder thick with documents and photographs. Your grandfather established the Sterling International Trust 10 years ago. It currently controls several major holdings, properties, resorts, and investments around the world. He slid a glossy report across the desk. My eyes widened. The Monte Carlo Bay Resort, he continued, earns approximately 40 million euros annually. The Belmont Grand Casino in Las Vegas, 145 million. There's also commercial real estate in London, Tokyo, and Sydney. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. These are mine? Yours, he confirmed. Your grandfather designed everything to activate on your 26th birthday. Until then, you received a modest annual stipend to maintain privacy and humility. It clicked. The mysterious deposits that had kept me afloat as a teacher. The quiet security I'd never understood. Alexander studied me. He wanted you to experience ordinary life before you inherited extraordinary power. He believed understanding struggle would make you a wiser owner. The room blurred for a moment as emotion tangled in my chest. Grandpa hadn't forgotten me. He'd been shaping me, protecting me. But why the secrecy? I asked. Why not tell me the truth? Because he knew your family, Alexander said softly. He feared they would manipulate you or resent you. He wanted you to see who truly valued you before you learned your worth. I remembered my mother's laughter, Marcus's smirk, Jennifer's sneer. They'd all shown their true faces when they thought I had nothing. Alexander's voice cut through my thoughts. Now that you know the truth, Miss Sterling, the next move is yours. The trust is fully in your control. You can live quietly, or you can claim your place in the world your grandfather built for you. I stared at the documents. Billions in assets, decades of strategy, a legacy disguised as rejection. My fingers brushed the gold lettering of my name. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I looked up and met Alexander's gaze. Tell me everything, I said. I want to know how to play the game he started. He smiled. Not the polite smile of royalty, but the knowing one of a teacher who'd just met his best student. Then welcome to your inheritance, Miss Sterling, he said. It's time to begin. That night, I stood on the balcony of my suite overlooking the Monaco harbor, the city glowing gold against the dark sea. The wind smelled of salt and victory. Below, yachts floated like quiet empires, including one that now belonged to me. I wasn't just visiting Monaco. I owned part of it. I thought about Grandpa's words during our last summer together. Power isn't about money, Ava. It's about what you choose to see when everyone else is blind. Back then, I'd thought he meant chess. Now, I understood he'd been teaching me life. Every late-night talk about business ethics, every riddle about decision-making, every quiet moment he'd forced me to think instead of react. It was all training. The next morning, Alexander introduced me to my advisory team, lawyers, accountants, investment analysts, all people who'd quietly managed my empire for a decade. They spoke of me with respect that felt undeserved but thrilling. I learned that my grandfather had left precise instructions for them. She must learn to lead before she inherits. Let her walk among ordinary people until she finds her own vision. And I had found it. In their conference room, surrounded by marble and glass, I studied charts and reports like they were battle maps. I saw the rise and fall of markets, the strength of assets, and the vulnerabilities of competitors. I wasn't intimidated. I was curious. The same curiosity that had driven me as a teacher now drove me as a strategist. When Alexander asked what I planned to do next, I answered without hesitation. I'm going home, he tilted his head. To confront them? To observe, I said. To see how people behave when they think I'm still small. He smiled faintly. Your grandfather would approve. He always said the best chess players never rush the board. That evening, I boarded the return flight to Portland, no longer a teacher with modest dreams, but a woman holding an empire behind her calm smile. My family thought they'd won the game at the will reading. They didn't realize the real inheritance had just been placed in my hands. Grandpa had given them comfort, and given me power. Now, it was my move. When I returned to Portland, everything looked the same. The coffee shop on the corner, my modest apartment, the same tired clouds pressing against the sky. But I wasn't the same. I was walking through an old life wearing a new identity, one lined with quiet power and billion-dollar secrets. For the first week, I lived normally. I went back to work, graded papers, and smiled at coworkers who had no idea that their underpaid friend Ava could buy the entire building. Every night, though, I logged onto the secure portal Alexander had set up for me and studied my holdings. I learned the rhythms of business, the flow of profit and loss, until the numbers started to feel like a second language. Then I turned my attention to something closer. My father's company, Sterling Maritime. He'd inherited it from Grandpa decades ago and tried to expand too quickly. The last few years had been rough. Shipping delays, supply chain issues, rising fuel costs. He'd taken on loans he couldn't afford, but his pride wouldn't let him ask for help. I started gathering information quietly. Through Alexander's team, I requested a financial assessment of the company, debt ratios, revenue streams, shareholder positions. The report arrived 2 days later, and reading it made my stomach twist. The numbers were bad. Really bad. Your father's business is cash poor, Alexander told me on a video call. His tone was calm, but his eyes were sharp. One strong push, and he'll have to sell assets or seek outside investment. He'd never sell to strangers, I said automatically. Alexander's lips curved slightly. He already might not have a choice. But what if the stranger were you? That sentence echoed in my mind long after the call ended. Could I do it? Buy my father's company? The same man who'd laughed at my envelope and told me Monaco was for people with real money? Yes, I could, and I would not out of revenge, not entirely. But because the company was part of Grandpa's legacy, if I didn't act, it would collapse. I'd be saving the name Sterling from my father's arrogance. Within a week, my lawyers set up a shell corporation registered in Switzerland, Neptune International Holdings. Alexander's advisors handled the logistics, anonymous ownership, clean transaction routes, and a full acquisition proposal drafted in professional language. The offer was generous. $45 million, all cash, 30% above the company's valuation. The perfect temptation. It would clear their debts, restore liquidity, and look like a miracle rescue from abroad. At home, I kept my new life hidden beneath normal routines. I even had dinner with my family the following Sunday. Mother greeted me with her usual polite smile. Ava, you look rested. Monaco must have been a nice vacation. I smiled back. It was educational, Father chuckled. Educational? Monaco is a playground for billionaires, not school teachers. Then maybe I learned from the best, I said, and sipped my wine. They laughed, oblivious. As the conversation drifted toward their inheritance, the estate renovations, Marcus's new car, Jennifer's plans for a Martha's Vineyard wedding, I studied their faces. All of them were building lives on short-term wealth. They had no idea I could erase their fortunes with a single email. The next morning, I called Alexander. Send the offer. 3 days later, my father phoned me at work, his voice tight. Ava, something strange happened. We received a buyout proposal from a Swiss investment group, completely out of nowhere. That sounds promising, I said evenly. It's too good, he muttered. They're offering $45 million for full ownership. I don't understand why they'd want us. Maybe they see potential you don't, I suggested, echoing Grandpa's old advice. He sighed. We're meeting Thursday to discuss it as a family. I'd like your opinion. You're good with details, I almost laughed. Good with details. If only he knew the detail that mattered most, that the buyer was his daughter. Thursday's dinner was tense. Financial documents covered the dining table. Marcus kept scrolling through his phone, muttering about yachts, while Jennifer sipped wine like she was auditioning for a magazine cover. Father cleared his throat. The offer is legitimate. $45 million. They've done their research. They even want to keep all current employees for 3 years. That's generous, I said, pretending to scan the contract. He frowned. You understand these terms? I read financial news sometimes, I smiled faintly. Grandpa always said the fine print is where truth hides. Mother chuckled awkwardly. Ava, darling, leave business talk to your father. But Father didn't laugh. He studied me like he was seeing a ghost of Grandpa in my expression. You're asking better questions than my attorney. The next day, at 4:47 p.m., he signed the papers. By 5:30 p.m., the company no longer belonged to him. That evening, I poured a glass of champagne in my apartment and watched the city lights reflect in the window. Alexander called to confirm, "Congratulations, Miss Sterling. Neptune International now owns Sterling Maritime entirely." You are the sole controlling beneficiary. I smiled. How's my father taking it? Relieved. He believes he's escaped a crisis. Good, I said softly. Let him rest a while. I don't want him to know yet. Alexander paused. Are you sure you wish to keep the secret? Yes. They taught me what it feels like to be underestimated. I think it's time they experience the same. When I hung up, I felt neither guilt nor triumph, only clarity. Grandpa's lessons had always been about strategy. He'd taught me that real power wasn't loud. It was quiet, deliberate, disguised until the perfect move. Now I understood the board, the players, the pieces. They thought the game had ended with the will reading, but in truth, it had only just begun. 2 weeks after my father sold the company, I decided it was time to move. Not into another apartment, but into a new life. The kind of life they said I didn't belong in. Patricia Wells, Portland's most exclusive real estate agent, nearly dropped her pen when I told her my budget. You're looking for... How much exactly, Miss Sterling? Between 15 and 20 million, I said casually. She blinked. Are you certain? Very, I replied, smiling. All cash. That afternoon, we toured properties that felt like movie sets. Mansions with glass walls, private gardens, and swimming pools shaped like crescents of blue crystal. But when we reached the last one, perched high above the city on 20 acres, I knew instantly. White stone, high ceilings, panoramic views of downtown Portland. From the master balcony, I could see my parents' neighborhood far below, small and neat like something from a snow globe. I'll take it, I said. Patricia's mouth fell open. Without negotiation? Full price, I confirmed. Close in 2 weeks. As soon as the paperwork cleared, Alexander called to congratulate me. So, Miss Sterling, you now own the largest private estate in Portland. May I ask why that specific property? I looked out over the skyline. Because it has a perfect view of where I came from. Moving day arrived beneath a gray Oregon sky. Trucks lined the driveway, movers carrying in artwork from London and furniture from Milan. The marble floors glowed in the morning light. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living small. I was living unapologetically. When my phone rang, I didn't need to check the caller ID. Dad? I answered. Ava. His voice came tight and uneasy. Your mother said you gave her an address to visit. The Westfield estate? That can't be right. Someone just bought that place for $19 million. I smiled faintly at my reflection in the glass wall. That's right, he hesitated. Ava, you're joking, right? I'm not in front of it, Dad, I said calmly. I'm in it, silence. Then, we're coming over. Minutes later, their modest Toyota appeared at the gates, looking absurdly out of place next to the line of black sedans. I watched them from the window as they stepped out, both frozen in disbelief. When I opened the grand double doors, Mother's voice came out as a whisper. Ava, what is this? My new home, I said simply. Come in. They entered like pilgrims in a cathedral, eyes wide as they took in the chandeliers, the sweeping staircase, the panoramic view of the city they thought belonged to others. Finally, Father spoke. How did you buy this house? I made an offer. An $18 million offer? His voice cracked. 19, I corrected. There was competition. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. That's not possible. You're a teacher. Teachers don't buy estates like this. Former teacher, I said, walking toward the balcony. I resigned. Mother clutched the railing. Ava, please. Where did the money come from? Are you in trouble? I turned to face them. Do you remember Grandpa's envelope? Their faces tightened at the mention. It wasn't just a letter, I said quietly. It was an inheritance. A trust fund. Grandpa set it up when I was 16. It activated last month on my 26th birthday. Father blinked. How much? I met his eyes. 1.3 billion. As of yesterday. The silence that followed was heavy enough to feel solid. That's impossible, he said finally. I held his gaze. That's what you thought about this house too. Mother's voice trembled. If that's true, why didn't you tell us? When? I asked, my tone calm but sharp. During the will reading when you all laughed at me? When Marcus joked I'd get Monopoly money, or when you told me Monaco was for real people, Father opened his mouth, then shut it. You all showed me exactly who you were when you thought I had nothing, I continued. Now you get to see who I am when I have everything. He stepped forward, voice shaking. Ava, listen, we were wrong. But let's discuss this rationally. If you really have that kind of wealth, there are tax structures, legal... There's one structure I'd like to discuss, I interrupted. Neptune International Holdings. He froze. What? The Swiss company that bought Sterling Maritime. I paused, savoring the moment. That's mine. His face went pale. You what? I bought your company, I said softly. 45 million, all cash. You signed the papers 2 weeks ago. He staggered back. You bought my life's work? I nodded, because I could, and because you never even thought to ask if I wanted to be part of it. Mother gasped. Ava, you can't. I already did. Father's voice broke. Give it back. No. Tears welled in his eyes, the proud businessman suddenly looking very small. Why, Ava? Why would you do this to us? I looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, because I learned from the best. Grandpa taught me strategy, you taught me invisibility. I just combined the two. Mother stepped forward. Ava, please, I think you should go, I said softly. You need time to understand that I'm not the forgotten girl at the will reading anymore. I'm the one holding the pen. They left in stunned silence. When the doors closed behind them, the house felt enormous and echoing. I stood alone in the foyer, my heels clicking against marble that gleamed like ice. Outside, the sky turned rose gold over the city. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing approval or survival. I was standing exactly where my grandfather had intended me to be. On higher ground, looking down not in revenge, but in revelation. Power didn't change me. It simply revealed who I'd been all along. 3 days after the confrontation, my phone began to buzz like an alarm clock that refused to die. First Marcus, then Jennifer, then Mom, then Dad. I ignored them all. The texts came in waves. Shock, disbelief, outrage. Is it true? You bought Dad's company? We need to talk now. I didn't reply. I spent the morning drinking espresso on the terrace, watching fog roll over the hills below my new mansion. Each sip tasted like control, something I'd never had before. By noon, Alexander called. I take it the family has discovered the truth? Oh, they've gone from denial to panic, I said dryly. It's fascinating, really. He chuckled softly. They're realizing the board has changed. You hold all the pieces now. That evening, the inevitable happened. The intercom buzzed. On the security camera, all 4 of them stood at the gate. Mom clutching her purse like armor. Dad's shoulders tight, Marcus and Jennifer flanking them like backup singers in a sad ballad. I pressed the intercom button. Can I help you? Ava, it's your family. Mom's voice came through, brittle but pleading. We need to talk. Did you make an appointment? Ava, stop this nonsense, Dad snapped. Let us in. I thought about it, then finally said, Fine. But my rules. You listen without interrupting. No demands, no shouting, and you acknowledge that everything I own is legitimate. If you can't agree, you can turn around now. Silence. Then Dad's voice. We agree. I pressed the button. The gates opened with a low mechanical hum, like the sound of judgment itself. When they stepped into the foyer, their eyes darted everywhere. The chandelier, the marble floor, the paintings. It wasn't jealousy on their faces this time. It was realization that the daughter they'd dismissed now lived in a world they could no longer touch. We sat in the living room, a long glass table between us. I crossed my legs, composed and silent until the tension nearly choked them. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. Ava, we owe you an apology. For what? I asked, my voice calm. For not understanding the situation, he said carefully. For not realizing what your grandfather had done for you. That's not what you should be apologizing for. Mom frowned. Then what? For the laughter, I said quietly. For the way you looked at me that day, like I was worthless. For every time you made me feel small so you could feel important. Mom's eyes flickered with guilt. We were shocked. It wasn't personal. It was exactly personal, I replied. You showed me who you are when you thought I had nothing. That's the truest test of character there is. Marcus shifted uneasily. Okay, fine. We were wrong. But buying Dad's company? That's extreme. I looked him dead in the eye. You call it extreme. I call it poetic balance. Dad exhaled sharply. You've made your point. Now sell it back to me. No, I said simply. He froze. Ava, please. That company is my life. It was your life, I corrected. Now it's my business. You sold it willingly, above market value, legally, fairly. I'm not undoing that because your ego can't handle it. His voice cracked. So this is revenge? I shook my head slowly. No, this is accountability. You raised me to respect contracts and hard work. That's what I'm doing. You just don't like being on the other side of it. Silence filled the room again, thick and awkward. Finally, I stood. If you want to make things right, here's what you can do. A public acknowledgement, all of you. Apologize for the way you treated me. Admit you were wrong. Do it where you made the mistake. Publicly. Jennifer blinked. You mean online? In front of everyone? Yes, I said. Where you bragged about your inheritances and mocked mine. You wanted an audience then. You'll have one now. Marcus groaned. That's humiliating. Good, I said. Now you know how I felt. Dad swallowed hard. And if we do? I smiled faintly. Then I might consider letting you manage the company again. Under me. They left an hour later, pale and shaken. As the gates closed behind their car, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not vengeance, but closure. They had once laughed while dividing Grandpa's legacy. Now I was the legacy, and they knew it. 1 week later, my phone lit up with notifications, not from banks or business partners this time, but from social media. It had begun. My father's formal apology appeared first, printed in the business section of the Oregonian. David Sterling acknowledges that he deeply underestimated his daughter, Ava Sterling, and her capabilities. Miss Sterling has demonstrated exceptional business acumen and leadership. I regret any dismissive comments made about her inheritance or potential. Mom's Facebook post followed within hours. To my daughter Ava, I'm sorry for the things I said that day. You were never forgotten. You were building something far greater than we understood. I'm proud of you. Jennifer's Instagram story was brief but dramatic. A photo of the will reading office with the caption, "We laughed then. We're not laughing now. Sorry, Ava." Marcus's post came last, half-hearted but public enough. Turns out my sister's the genius of the family. Guess Grandpa knew what he was doing. I didn't smile. I didn't even reply. I just forwarded the links to Alexander. He called moments later, amusement in his voice. Congratulations, Miss Sterling. It seems your family has finally played their part in your public introduction. Let them, I said simply. They wanted attention. Now they have it. The apology storm went viral. Business blogs picked it up, followed by local news, then national outlets. The teacher turned billionaire, one headline read. Another, the hidden heiress who bought her father's company. Overnight, I went from invisible to infamous. Invitations flooded my inbox. Interviews, investment partnerships, charity galas. I declined almost all of them. Power didn't need to shout. It needed only to exist. Instead, I turned my focus back to what mattered. Sterling Maritime. Dad returned to work as general manager under Neptune Holdings, reporting directly to my management team. I kept him in the same office, same title, same responsibilities. Only now, every decision went through me. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. To his credit, he handled it with quiet professionalism. Over time, his resentment faded into something else. Respect. The company began to thrive again. With my capital, debts were erased, new ships commissioned, and employee benefits expanded. For the first time in years, Sterling Maritime was solvent, strong, even admired. At our 6-month review meeting, Dad looked across the table and said, "You saved it." "Ava, you saved everything I nearly lost." I nodded. "We saved it," I corrected softly. Mom started visiting more often too, though always with a hesitancy that hadn't been there before. She no longer talked about money or status. just about family dinners, old memories, and my health. For the first time, her voice carried warmth without calculation. Marcus had stopped bragging and started listening. He'd asked if I could help him learn about business, really learn from the ground up. And Jennifer, well, she'd gone quiet, humbled in a way that felt sincere. One evening, as we sat together for the first family dinner since everything changed, Dad raised his glass. To second chances, he said. To seeing clearly, I added. They smiled, and for once it felt real. Not a performance, but peace. Later that night, standing alone on my balcony, I looked down at the city lights and thought of Grandpa. He'd orchestrated all of this, every step, every lesson disguised as loss. He hadn't just left me wealth, he'd left me wisdom. He'd known that real fortune wasn't inherited. It was earned, through patience, pain, and perspective. The family that once laughed at my envelope now worked for me, respected me, and finally saw who I truly was. They got their millions. I got my power. And that, I realized, was the truest reversal of all. A year later, I stood on the deck of my yacht, the Legacy, as the Portland skyline shimmered against the river. The breeze smelled of salt and jasmine, the same scent Grandpa's garden had when I was a child. Somewhere between the crash of waves and the hum of the engines, I realized I had become the woman he'd always known I could be. The Legacy wasn't the biggest yacht in the marina, but it was mine, earned, managed, and cherished. I used it to host business partners, charity events, and sometimes just quiet dinners for people who valued authenticity over titles. That was what Grandpa wanted, not wealth without purpose, but purpose empowered by wealth. In the years since the will reading, my life had transformed in ways I could barely recognize. The once overlooked teacher was now the CEO of an international investment network spanning resorts, real estate, and logistics. My portfolio had grown from $1.3 to nearly $2 billion. But what mattered more was the empire's foundation, built not on greed, but on principle. My father, now head of operations for Sterling Maritime, ran the company with renewed pride. He no longer saw my leadership as a threat, but as an evolution. "You've made it better than I ever did," he admitted one evening during a board meeting. "Your grandfather would have been proud." Mom had softened too. She often came to visit, bringing homemade meals to my estate, a quiet attempt to reconnect. We'd talk for hours about family history, about Grandpa's childhood, about the things money could never fix but love could heal. Even Marcus had changed. True to his word, he joined one of my smaller subsidiaries as a junior analyst. No privilege, no shortcuts. At first, he complained about the workload, but after 6 months, his reports started showing real insight. "I didn't think I'd ever work for you," he said once, half joking. Now I can't imagine working for anyone else. Jennifer, humbled by the fallout of her lavish lifestyle, reinvented herself as an event planner, independent, responsible, and happy. "You were right," she told me during one of our lunches. "When you stop chasing validation, you finally start living." But my proudest creation wasn't the empire or the wealth. It was the Robert Sterling Foundation for Education and Innovation. With a $100 million endowment, the foundation provided scholarships to underprivileged students across the Pacific Northwest. Kids who were bright but overlooked, just like I once was. At the foundation's first gala, I stood at the podium and looked out at a sea of faces, teachers, students, families, and felt something anchor deep in my chest. "My grandfather taught me," I began, "that the greatest gifts don't always come in shiny boxes or big numbers. Sometimes they come disguised as disappointment, as rejection, as silence. Because that's where you learn your own strength." The applause was warm, genuine. But what mattered most was the feeling, the certainty that Grandpa's lesson had come full circle. He hadn't just made me wealthy, he'd made me wise. That night, after everyone left, I walked alone along the dock, the city lights reflected in the dark water like scattered gold. My reflection shimmered between them, part teacher, part businesswoman, part dreamer, but entirely myself. The family that once mocked me now respected me. The name that had once been a shadow under my father's legacy was now the banner of an empire. I had turned humiliation into fuel and doubt into foundation. As the river rippled quietly, I whispered, "You were right, Grandpa. Sometimes you have to lose everything others see to find everything that matters." I looked back at the glowing legacy, her name painted in gold across the hull. She wasn't just a yacht, she was a symbol of growth, of grace, of a girl who once held an envelope and thought she had nothing. Now she held everything that truly counted. Lessons learned for the listener. Never let others define your worth. People may laugh when you have nothing, but only you know what you're building behind the scenes. Humility is hidden strength. Working hard in silence and learning quietly is often the most powerful strategy before your breakthrough. True success isn't revenge, it's growth. When you can help others without bitterness, you've already won in the most meaningful way. Wealth isn't just money, it's confidence, gratitude, and the ability to create opportunities for others. Sometimes pain is the greatest gift, because the moments that hurt the most often teach you how to stand taller, think smarter, and become stronger. So if you've ever been underestimated, remember this: what others dismiss today might be the very strength that transforms your tomorrow.